All right, this video is going to be about setting up your workspace, your drawing screen customization here. And so, if you have it, go ahead and open up a blank drawing, and come down here to your status bar. And we talked about customizing a status bar in the last video. Okay, so you want to make sure you've got certain things turned on. The workspace icon here. Here's where AutoCAD has what's known as workspaces. And the three that come by default are drafting, annotation, 3D basics, 3D modeling. And it changes your menu structure, your toolbars and your palettes and things like that. So if I look at the 3D basics, you can see it changes all my menus to things that are predominantly used in 3D modeling, okay? And the same way, with the 3D modeling one, so it's a bit different. All right, so let's go back to the drafting and annotation. I showed you, that's how you change workspaces. And in chapter 4, you're going to be setting up a custom workspace. Okay, and I'll show you a little bit of how to get into those things, but the instructions are in chapter 4, and you're going to follow that through. Just to give you an example of what I work with, this is a lot of what I work with. Okay, so it's the 2D drafting and annotation one, but I've added a couple of things here that I use often: the layer property manager, the properties, the design center. The toolbars here for drawing, object snaps, and dimensioning, because I find it quicker to snap over to a toolbar than to go through the palettes up here. And I've got a tool palette over here that I've got loaded with different types of leaders, because in one of the classes, we got to deal with different types of leaders in a lot of the things that we do. So it's still open from the last time I used it. But for the most part, you're going to be starting with drafting and annotation, and then you're going to save one. Okay, so we talked about the quick access toolbar in the last time, and I showed you how to turn different things on, different things off. Okay, the status bar down here, I talked about that. I didn't go over all the things, and we're going to get to them as we go through it, but for the most part, I highly recommend that you turn on coordinates. Model space should stay turned on. The grid and snap mode should be on. Dynamic input should definitely be on. Line weight, what line weight is when we start setting up layers, and you're going to do that in chapter 4, you can assign a line thickness or weight to each layer so that the lines are different thicknesses. Because in our drafting standards, hidden lines and center lines are thinner than object lines. The visible lines or the object lines, they should be thicker. And then your border should be even thicker than that. Okay, and there's other lines too that have things in there with different thicknesses. Well, what line weight does is it doesn't display the exact line thickness, but it displays it as kind of a relative. And so I'll let me just draw a couple of lines here. And I'm going to change the line thickness. Make it something obvious here for you. And line thickness is off now. And if I turn line thickness on, you can see the change. Now that's not the exact thickness, it's just relative to what your screen is zoomed in at. Okay, so oftentimes I will have line thickness turned off when I'm actually drawing. because it's easier to find my snaps and things like that. But turn it on so that you can turn, so that you can turn it on so that you can check it. I would definitely recommend you can turn off workspace switching. Nah, you can leave that one on there because once you get things set up, you can turn it off, of course. Definitely turn off clean screen because you don't want to accidentally delete things. Now, the book tells you how to set up toolbars. Okay, so up here on the quick access toolbar, you're going to hit the pull down and come down here and go show menu bar. And this brings up the old school, if you will, menu bar to where, everything was in there. And we want to go to Tools, Toolbars, and AutoCAD. And in here, you can turn on whichever toolbars that you particularly want to have, okay? And then once you've got one loaded, and now it's docked to the side. If you click it and drag it out here, now it's a floating toolbar, and you can close it. The ones that I use regularly, I like to dock them to the side. And then you can right-click on an existing toolbar and go back into it to add the ones that you want. Okay, so I'm not going to set that up, but typically I'll have the draw, the modify, the dimension, and the object snap toolbars loaded. Okay, and then the book shows you how to come down here, workspace settings, and save current as, and then you give it the name as it directs you to there in the toolbar. Okay. So let me switch. I'll leave it the way it is here. Okay. I was thinking about switching over, but I don't need to switch over right now. Okay, so on the status bar, I had told you about blue means it's on, black, not blue means it's off. We talked about customizing it over here. Well, let's talk about dynamic input. Now, this little white box down here is the command line. And way back in the day, you had to type in every AutoCAD command. Okay, thus the command line. Well, now we have icons and we have menu bars and tool palettes and things like that. But the command line is still there and it still works. So you don't have to click in it to execute a command. You can just start typing unless you are actually in a command. Okay, so I'm going to type a command. So I'm going to start typing line. So L, and you can see because I've got dynamic input turned on, it's pulling up the different commands. Well, the shortcut for line is just the letter L, and you press enter. Or you could select it on, on the pull downs there. Now, you look at the command line, and it's asking you what it wants. It's telling you, okay, specify the first point. And so I can click a place, and then I can drag out, and it's showing me the distance that I'm going so far and the angle that I'm at. Okay, and so I can click, and the line command stays active until you either right-click or press escape. Okay, so you can right-click the mouse and go enter, and then that ends the command. Or you could press the escape key and it will end the command. Okay. And every command that AutoCAD has, if there's an option, it's going to ask you something in the command line and in dynamic input of what you're supposed to do next or what it wants. If you're going to draw a circle, it asks you for the center point of the circle and then the radius of the circle. Okay. So with AutoCAD uses, I said it before, uses a coordinate system. And what we know is absolute coordinates versus relative coordinates. Absolute means that everything is from the 0 point, okay, which is where our UCS symbol is located at. Everything is from there. Okay. Relative means it's from the last point that you clicked. It's relative to that point. As an example of this is that if you're giving someone directions to get from one place to another place, you could give them the address for, I don't know, the Pizza Hut. Okay, 4560 Cobb Parkway, Marietta. Okay, that's an absolute point. Okay, because it's there, it's located there. But if you were to tell them, oh, you get to the Pizza Hut, get on this road out here in front of us and go about 2 miles to the right, and there'll be the Pizza Hut. That's a relative distance or a relative direction, if you will. That's the way it works with AutoCAD. Now, when dynamic input is on, AutoCAD works one way in dealing with coordinates, but when it is off, it works in a different way. Okay, and there's a reason for both. Sometimes you want to draw absolute coordinates all the time. Sometimes you just want to draw them for the first point of your line. Okay. Sometimes you want relative all the time. Sometimes you don't want it at all. Okay, so every drawing you may have a different way that you need to do things. So this is covered in the textbook in chapter 4. So I'm going to demonstrate it to you here. If I start my line command, okay, and by default I've got dynamic on. Okay, and so it's since I haven't put anything in yet, it's going to assume that I'm starting at absolute value. So I'm going to type 2, 2 and press enter. Okay, now that location right there is 2 units to the right and 2 units up from the origin. Okay, that was absolute coordinates because it's the first point that I used in my command. Okay, now the next set of points that I put in will be relative coordinates to that first point. So if I go 2, 3 and press enter, then it draws a line that is 2 units to the right and 3 units up from this first point that I was at. Okay, so that means this point here is relative to the original point. Here is a little chart, and I can put this image into Blackboard so that you can kind of see it. But if you have dynamic on or dynamic off, and depending upon what you want to type in, now remember the first point in the command is going to be absolute value. Okay, but then additional points, okay, especially in the line command or the polyline command, if you want absolute coordinates, you've got to put in the pound symbol first. If you want relative coordinates, you can just type them in. But if you got dynamic input turned off, it changes things a little bit. So you have to, everything is by default absolute coordinates. So if you want relative, you have to use the @ symbol. Okay. So now then, to demonstrate absolute and absolute. So I'm going to start my line command again, and I'm going to say 2, 2, enter. Okay, and now I want it to be absolute in a different location. So I would say the pound symbol 2, 3. Same coordinates that we used last time. So you can see it drew a different line because the endpoint of this line is 2 units to the right from the origin and 3 units up from the origin. Now, to demonstrate, if I turn dynamic input off, and I'll do that again, line command, and this is going to be absolute, so I'm going to go 5, 5, Okay, so that started my line there at the absolute value of 5, 5. Now if I type in 7, 7, it draws that line up to the absolute point of 7, 7, because this is 7 units to the right from the origin, 7 units up. Okay, so now let's do it with relative in the same kind of a thing. So we'll start the line command again. First point is going to be 5, 5, enter. And now I want to go relative, so I'll say at symbol 7, 7, and enter. And you can see it draws this line 7 units to the right and 7 units up from where I started the line point, so it's relative. Now we have one other thing here called polar coordinates, and I'm going to turn dynamic back on. Polar coordinates is when you have to type in when you have to draw a line at an angle, and you're going to find as you're working through AutoCAD that it's much more accurate if you type in your distances and even your angles. Angles, we have other ways of of dealing with angles sometimes, but it's more accurate if you type it in on the keyboard than as opposed to drawing it with a mouse. And I'm going to get into some examples of that in another video here. So let's start the line command. And I'm just going to pick a point here and drag out. And I could tell it I want a line a distance of 5. And I'm going to press the tab key. And then I can type in the angle that I want. And so I'm going to say 45 degrees. Okay. Now it drew this line 5 units long at 45 degrees above the x-axis. Because in AutoCAD, by default, the positive x-axis is 0 degrees. Okay, and as you go up, like, we're starting here and we're coming up, that's a positive angle. And it can go all the way at 90, 180, it can go down to 270, it can go to 359 in a positive direction. If you want the line to come down, I'll demonstrate that one again. First point, let me pick that point. And I'm going to say a unit of 5, tab, minus 45 degrees. It didn't do it. I don't know if I had my snap or what, but a negative direction would bring it down. Let's go into that again. 5, tab. Maybe because my mouse was up in that direction. I think I see what it is. Let's see. Yeah. One of the changes recently in AutoCAD is when you type in the angle, it kind of depends on what quadrant your cursor is in. Because I had my cursor down here in the negative quadrant, and I typed a negative distance, it went up to the positive quadrant. Anyway, that's one way of dealing with that. Okay, so now then, if I have dynamic input turned off, and I go line, and I'm going to start a point here, I want to tell it, because I'm dealing with relative now, I'm going to tell it at 5, and I'm going to go the angle symbol, 45 degrees, and then press enter. Okay, so you kind of learn these things as you're working through the program. One thing to remember now, if dynamic input is turned on, and you type a comma between the values, the points between the values, then that's telling it that you're doing a relative distance. Okay, based on those 2 points. But if you use the tab key between the 2 numerals, it's telling AutoCAD that that is an angle. Okay, All right, so let's stop this video and then we'll come back with the next one to talk about ortho and polar tracking and some of the settings.